Welcome to Bold Leaders, Actionable Solutions, a video series presented by Ellig Group and the Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM. I'm Janice Ellig, CEO of Ellig Group. We are a global executive and board search leadership and advisory firm with a 40-plus year track record of supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Johnny Taylor, CEO of SHRM, a global professional association of human resources professionals, with over 300,000 members representing nearly 120 million employees, joins me today in thanking all of you for taking the time to consider how senior executives and board directors can accelerate gender and racial diversity in America's boardrooms. Today's program is one of 6 that we plan to release in the coming weeks based on a white paper of the same name published in the winter of 2020. Earlier this year, Johnny and I were honored to host an impressive group of experienced CEOs and corporate board members to talk about boardroom diversity and share candid insights around challenges and potential solutions to enhance the composition of boards. Our video series will bring to life the white paper, where CEOs and directors will share their insights with all of you. And that is what we are going to do today. To receive the paper, Bold Leaders, Actionable Solutions, simply go to our website, elliggroup.com, or email inquiries@elliggroup.com, and we will send you a copy.
Thank you, Janice. I'm Nicole Sanford, Ellig Group's board practice leader and the host of today's conversation. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'm joined by 2 esteemed business leaders, Cindie Jamison and Richard Carrion, both of whom participated in the virtual convening that Janice just spoke of. Cindie is an experienced CFO, board member, and senior advisor for companies in a variety of industries. She's particularly well known in the retail sector. Currently, Cindie serves as chairman of Tractor Supply Company and board member of Big Lots, Office Depot, and Darden Inc. She has chaired many board committees, including multiple nominating and governance committees, which is particularly relevant for today's conversation. Richard Carrion is also an experienced executive and board member. He is an operating partner at J.C. Flowers and Company, as well as the executive chairman and former longtime CEO of Popular Inc., the holding company of Banco Popular de Puerto Rico. He has served as a Class A director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and director of NYNEX Corporation, one of Verizon's predecessor companies. Thank you both so much for joining us today. So we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to jump right in. And Cindie, I'm going to start with you. Certainly, there's been a lot of talk about board diversity now, but we've been hearing about this for a really long time, and you've been leading boards for a long time. So does the current focus feel different to you? And if so, why?
You know, it's interesting. I think the words are the same, but the context is completely different. I think the words have been spoken for a long time, but there's a lot more action behind it now. I think it's wrapped up in a greater societal and political pressure and sense of change that's happening all over the world right now. And I think that social responsibility has become much more important and has much more of a pressing urgency to it, which I think is this gets wrapped up into. You know, I think that the fact that the push for diversity right now and the changes in the boardroom are coming from so many places. They're backed by investors and shareholders. They're getting so much attention in the media and in think forums like this. I just think it's very, very topical, and that creates an urgency and a pressure to make it happen, to put the action behind the words. Having said that, you know, I think that there's a lot that has to happen for this to occur, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But I think, you know, intention is one thing. Intention is really important, and outside pressure around it is really important. But there are a lot of other things that have to line up to actually affect the changes.
Richard, how does that align to what you've seen over the course of your board career?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you know, a couple of things that I think what is different now are the prevalence it's what's different. You know, 20, 25 years ago, it was unusual. And now the opposite is true. Not to be doing something, not to be talking about this is unusual. Also, I would think the process by which you go through board selection is a lot more structured now, a lot more deliberate, a lot more focused. People are tracking it. You know, the proxy advisory firms are tracking it. The investors are tracking it. So I think, you know, you're going to see a lot more of this in the future. It's going to accelerate, and I think it's mostly the result of a change, a new generation that really thinks and feels differently about this.
Well, I'm going to stay with you for a minute, Richard, and talk to you a little bit about the conversation we had around intentionality in our white paper, Bold Leaders, Actionable Solutions. There's a lot in there about intentionality. In fact, it's kind of a theme that runs all the way through all the other parts of the conversation. But in that context, you really talked about how intentionality has played into your efforts to diversify your board, which is pretty diverse. You have 3 spectacular women, and you know, none of that happens by accident. So would you mind sharing with us how intentionality played into your efforts?
Well, again, just to put things in context, Popular, which, you know, I've been a part of since, you could argue, since I was born, but Popular is unique in many ways. We operate in 3 geographies: Puerto Rico, New York, and Miami. But Puerto Rico continues to be our main market. So, you know, and we are mostly of Hispanic origin. Things left to their own devices, it would be, you know, a bunch of, you know, Puerto Rican guys that are successful in business hanging around a table. But, you know, you want to, first of all, prevent insularity. You know, we do live on an island, and you know, you can get that perspective can get cloudy. You can focus on just on Puerto Rico. You want some familiarity with at least 2 of the 3 markets. Okay, so that's, you know, kind of table stakes. Then as the board evolves, you need different skills. You spoke of the 3 women on our board. You know, Maria Luisa Ferre is, you know, leads one of the largest groups, certainly the largest media group in Puerto Rico. She's also expanded into the mainland, and she has a unique sense of the pulse of Puerto Rico and the people and the economy. We have Kim Goodwin. Kim worked at Credit Suisse internationally. She's also been on many boards. So, you know, we wanted a perspective of an investor. And that's what we get from Kim, her perspective as an investor. And then finally, you know, Myrna Soto, you know, cybercrime has grown to be a bigger concern. So, you know, she brings that skill set and gives us, you know, a lot of help in that area. So you want a base overall familiarity. Then you're looking for specific things. Maybe you want to fill a role in a financial expert or whatever. Given that, and all other things being equal, you know, we like to you know, weigh the scales. You know, if we have 2 candidates, we're going to, you know, at this point select a woman until we're satisfied that we have good balance on the board, and that's a deliberate thing. You know, it's a tricky balancing act, but I think it needs to be done. I'm thankful people did it in my case, frankly.
It's interesting, as I was listening to you, one of the side effects, I think, of the search for financial expertise, and then the addition of women to the board, was this functional experience became more attractive. And I think my experience has been that boards find that functional experience to be really helpful, and maybe didn't anticipate that before they started bringing people with functional expertise on the board. It sounds like that has been your experience, that you've actually found that sort of deep technical or functional expertise to be valuable.
Yeah. But again, you know, you start with a base minimum. You know, you want the, you know, in our case, this knowledge of 2 of the 3 markets we're in. You want some familiarity with financials, and you know, you want a specific skill, and then, you know, you go through the candidate list.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. I think that, you know, it's really important not to term a board seat a quote unquote diverse board seat. It's, you know, you look for a skill set or a competency, and then you make sure that you find diverse candidates to evaluate that have that. But I think the point for boards that are just starting to think about this is those people are out there in spades. Like, figure out the skill set you need first, and I guarantee you, you'll be able to find that in diverse, with a diverse nature attached to it.
Cindie, you also talked about intentionality in the paper, and you talked about it in terms of board refreshment, and courage was another theme that I think ran throughout the paper, but certainly in the discussion of board refreshment. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that has played into the processes that you've been able to implement on your boards around board refreshment?
Sure. So, you know, I think intentionality is critical. And I think that it starts there with the intention to change your board and incorporate more diversity into your board. But I think you have to back up a step. Before you can have intentionality, you have to have board seats available. And that means you either have to increase the size of your board, or you have to do a very thorough assessment and ask yourself some tough questions about your current board and who's performing and who isn't. And I think that that takes courage. I think it's, the boardroom has traditionally been a pretty protected place. And I think, although certainly over my board career over the last 20 or so years, I've seen great improvement. You know, it has a historical precedent for having sort of people who get board seats and just hang on to them and, you know, make refreshment pretty difficult. And so I think where the courage comes in is to really assess your current board critically and objectively and take action on underperforming members, which is not pleasant to do, difficult to do, unpleasant to do. And that's why I use the word courage. But I think that, you know, I've seen so many instances where there are sort of universally acknowledged underperformers, kind of behind the scenes, you know, people whispering in subcontext. People are sort of aware that someone or some people aren't performing up to snuff, but they don't do anything about it. And so I think it's really beholden on the leadership of a board to hold themselves accountable to create those board seats and to create the turnover and the refreshment that's necessary to affect the intentionality of bringing the diversity into the room.
Yeah, I've seen a big difference in this area in terms of assessment and holding each other accountable from when I first started focusing on boards 20 years ago. But it does feel like there's a lot of work left to do, especially when you look at companies of different maturities and different growth stages of growth. Richard, how have you seen the refreshment activities evolve with the boards that you've been involved in?
Well, you know, I have to give a shout out, if you will, to Ivan Seidenberg, who, in my view, is probably the most understated and underrated CEO of any large public company in the last 25, 30 years. And, you know, in February of 1995, when he was about to become chair and CEO, he you know, reached out to me, brought me on board. I was the first Latino on that board. A few months later, he brought on Hugh Price, first African American on that board. Hugh served about 20 years. I served 24 years. We watched it go from NYNEX to Bell Atlantic to Verizon, and watch as that diversity process evolved. The current lead director is Clarence Otis. So, you know, it was really Ivan who had the vision and had the courage to set this in motion in a very large Fortune 50 company, you know, over 25 years ago. So anything, you know, I've done seems rather unremarkable when I compare it to that, frankly. You know, I operate in a very different environment, and it's not, you know, my family was very involved with the bank for many years, so it was much easier to move in that sense.
Well, both of you have been in the situation of not only recruiting diverse directors to your boards, but you've both been, as you just talked about, Richard, the first diverse director on a board. What kind of advice would you give to people who are entering the boardroom in that same situation as the first diverse director? Cindie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think there's two things that are really important when you first join a board. One is to listen and learn, and the other is to really dig into and appreciate the difference between what a board member does and what management does. You know, I don't think it's exclusively true, but it's usually true that, you know, it's the person's first board. They may be the first of their ilk on that board, but in many cases, they are also, if for them personally, it's their first board. And so I think there's a lot of dynamics going on. There's the dynamics of being a first-time board member. And as I said, figuring out what that role is and the difference between the fact that you're not acting as management anymore in this environment. And then the second is that you're also representing for this board an entrant of a new ilk, you know, representing some kind of diversity. And so I think it's really important to be respectful, not to come in and sort of not to bulldoze your way in, not to be militant or critical, especially if you're the first of something. I really appreciate sort of the Trojan horse approach where you come in and you watch and you learn and you listen and you build relationships, and slowly over time you start making a contribution, and, you know, trust me, your voice gets heard. But I think too many board members joining boards, I think, feel like they have to make an immediate impact, and it can come across as a little bit caustic. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is to just be a little patient, relax, listen and learn, establish relationships. But I personally, I am a little bit on a soapbox about this. I think the onus is on the board and the board leadership to make that board member successful. I don't think it's necessarily all on them, or even mostly on them. You know, I think you bring them on because they bring something, as Richard said, not just diversity, but a skill set as well. And I think it's really important for the leaders of that board to work on the integration, to work on the collegiality, to offer avenues behind the scene for that person to ask questions and learn and start to feel more comfortable and more confident. And so I really put the onus of the success of this on the board of leadership, not necessarily on the new board member, but certainly just listening, learning, contributing when you can, but being respectful, I think, would be the advice that I would give.
Richard?
I have to agree 100%. Listen, you know, listen, ask stupid questions, but don't be in a hurry. It's more important to take your time, understand the industry you're in, understand the company, understand the culture, build some relationships with the board, and clearly that is dependent on both sides working out. And then you can bring your perspective and make a contribution. But one has to keep in mind that you represent all shareholders, not just a particular group. You're there to do a job for all shareholders. You know, whether you are Latino or African American or woman, whatever, you know, you're there as a servant of the shareholders.
And Richard, you have another perspective to add here in terms of what you see on private companies, especially within the private equity portfolio company world. So what would you share from that perspective?
Well, I think, you know, again, as Cindie says, you have to be very, very clear on what is management's role and what is the board's role. I've found now that I'm on the board of a few institutions from a private equity point of view, that your shareholders are a lot more impatient than you know, your typical public company group of shareholders. They want, you know, results very quickly, sometimes too quickly to their detriment.
Cindie, any final thoughts to share?
I think I would just echo the themes that, there's a lot more than intentionality involved with this. Intentionality is critically important, but there are so many other things, that actions and energy that have to go into this to make it successful on the part of the leadership of a board, the CEOs of companies, board members themselves, prospective board members, and search firms. I think this is really a delicate dance that we're all learning and all getting better at, but it's really, really important.
Richard?
Well, I agree with that. I think this is evolving. We're seeing a lot more diversity on boards. People are watching a lot more closely, both from the investor point of view, as from shareholders and proxy advisory firms and the like. So I think again, it is critical that we don't tokenize this, that you bring a skill set, and that's what's critical.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today.